Hello, everyone. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Diane Leonard. I'm the president and founder of D.H. Leonard Consulting and Grant Writing Services. We've been around for 15 years talking about nonprofit capacity and usually taking the slant of grant writing. But we've been having so much fun the past 2 years since we started our product, Agile in Nonprofits, where we're helping nonprofits understand what is Agile. What are the different frameworks we might consider? How can we use this in our organizations to create twice the impact in half the time? And so when we think about what's the best way, it's not just to teach you the framework, but also to help show amazing examples of what this can look like in organizations. And so, Jessica, we've got a really exciting conversation ahead of us today, don't we?
Absolutely. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jessica Crowley. I'm an enterprise Agile coach and licensed Scrum trainer on the Agile and Nonprofits team. And today I am so excited because we have a guest, Eric Engelmann. And Eric has brought his experience in the for-profit world as a CEO using Agile to the nonprofit world when he created the New Bohemian Innovation Collaborative. Hi, Eric. I'm so happy you're here. And I guess my question is, would you be willing to introduce yourself a little bit and talk about what inspired you for New BoCo and what you think some of the value is in using Agile to start up a nonprofit?
Sure. So I had started a company in 1999 called Geonetric in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And that company grew really quickly. We were on the Inc. 5000 list, I think 7 times. And about 15 years into that role, I guess I decided it was time to, do something different. I still work with those folks today. I still own most of that company today, but I founded that nonprofit in 2014. And, at that company, I had gone through a massive and aggressive organizational culture change all around Agile, and particularly using Scrum values as kind of the core of it. And it was pretty radical. It was essentially ripping the hierarchy out and doing a bunch of other things. So when we decided to start a nonprofit, originally its mission was to focus on helping entrepreneurs to build new organizations in eastern Iowa. And we could start an organization from scratch with the values that we wanted. At my prior company, we were shifting it kind of on the fly. We'd hired people with one set of values and said, well, now we're going to instill another. Starting a nonprofit from scratch with a brand new slate, you can kind of go wherever you want. And that was a huge advantage, which we knew we had. Anyway, we started that company in 2014, the nonprofit in 2014. It's still going strong today. It's been incredibly valuable in building an organization because the world changes very, very quickly. And as we knew when we very first, even in our first paragraph, we gave the IRS on what our nonprofit was going to do. It started with entrepreneurs, but we knew all the other things that go into making businesses successful. Just as an example, were things like technical talent. We knew we would eventually need to deal with some technical talent shortages. We knew we wanted to work with companies that wanted to innovate and do new things. And we wanted to put all that under one umbrella. And so the nonprofit has kind of proliferated from starting with one thing, really starting with entrepreneurs, to all the things that are kind of adjacent to them, and building. And the ability to adjust rapidly to those changes has been critical to making that work.
That is so amazing to hear the background and how you took what you learned in the for-profit, used it to start a nonprofit. And as I looked back and read some information about your growth, looks like you grew rather quickly over the years as a nonprofit too. And as you expanded and went sort of beyond like the traditional recommended Scrum team size, and it doesn't seem like you're using traditional nonprofit org chart hierarchy. Can you talk with us a little bit about how you've handled team growth in that structure where you did get to set the stage from the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, when we started, we had one core program and a couple of little ones. There was 2 people when we opened the place. But as we grew, especially as we kind of took on different markets, that's essentially our goal was to have a distinct team that could solve a specific problem and had complete visibility to everything, all the way to the end customer. And so today the organization is kind of broken into 3 groups. And within those groups, the teams kind of form as needed just to do certain things. But there's a group that works with entrepreneurs in the core of the business. There's a group that essentially works on our education group. and then there's a piece that works with our corporate clients. And but just as an example, in that education group, that group then it's sort of like cell division. They grew to a point where, hey, we now have a program that trains adults on how to do software development, and we have a program all across the state where we're teaching teachers how to teach computer science in schools. And those are similar, but they're kind of different. And so over time, those teams work together and separately where they need to. And we let the teams decide when that cost-benefit trade-off makes sense to sort of work together from essentially one Scrum board and one product owner. We've recently switched it. So I think we have 6, maybe 7 product owners now in the organization. And just as an example of how fluid it is, every year we put on this big event called Entrefest. This year, of course, it was virtual, but we had hundreds of people come to this event. And the teams they were sort of a team that all year round, they're working on events. But when this gets near, people kind of wind up proliferating and going onto that team to help them execute that program. And they're, for the weeks leading up to it, they're really focused on that. So the whole organization, which today is, I think, 19 people, is really flexible in how those teams are organized and designed. And it's grown pretty organically from the beginning.
Wow, that's amazing. So I have to give a plug here for the article that you wrote. It's called Building an Agile Nonprofit. And when I read this, I was just, it's everything that we're trying to encourage other nonprofits to try. And I can't help but notice like the rolling Scrum board you have behind you, which you featured in your article.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit about that and how much you're making work visible and the value of a nonprofit trying to do that?
Yeah, well, I'll give you some examples of kind of how it manifests. One is the Scrum boards, although given that everybody's working from home, we're all doing it electronically now. But, when we set everything up, we wanted it to be as transparent as we could within the constraints of a few governance things that just need to be confidential. But everything else is open, and those kind of manifest in policies in the way we work every day. I don't know if you use Slack, but it's a communication thing for our entire team. And almost every channel in there is public. We really discourage the use of private channels. Anyone can join or leave any channel they want whenever they want. All the budgets and financials are transparent. In fact, just earlier today, we had our all hands meeting where we kind of walked through, all right, here's what we thought was going to happen for the year. Here's what actually happened. And each team talks about what things they learned and what didn't go well, and how they're going to address changes. And obviously a lot has changed in the last 90 days with COVID and whatnot. So everybody's, adapting to new situations. All of the salary data is inherent within that. It's in those documents, and everybody can see everybody else's salary information. And I think the reason that's there is because we really wanted to build both a level of trust within the team members, which is critical for just as in the 5 dysfunctions of a team. If you don't have trust, the rest falls apart, for example. And so you have to start from this idea that by default, we trust people. But it's also a piece of building accountability in, because if people understand what their work really means and how this thing I do today when I pull this card on a Scrum board affects this number on our plan versus our budget, then they can make good decisions. And so what I didn't want to be was, I have to be, as the executive director of this nonprofit, the sort of maestro organizer of all the things. I want it to be, look, your goal is to reach as many kids as you can with computer science. Go, figure it out. I'm not going to ask for help, but I'm not going to help you plan the thing out. They have to understand then what the goals are that they're aiming for, so that team can adjust and make good decisions as they're closest to it. So it was really important for me in a business that was designed to change quickly and adapt quickly, that I could let people who were doing the work make decisions, and I didn't have to make those decisions. I'm happy to give them advice, and we talk about those things every week, but it's their decision to make, and the transparency was critical to making that possible.
I definitely found that fascinating. I even circled it. I was like, what? Because I saw the transparency with the salary piece of it, and also just the transparency in general, where anybody can attend a board meeting, and the different points where you were saying that that's become just a core part of your culture. I think that's amazing. And also you triggered a question in my mind about COVID-19. So you said, the last 60 days have been quite different. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we run a code school that's for adults learning to code, and it was intended and designed to be in person. And we would sell it as how important that was, that you get these in-person interactions, you're working together on a team to get things done. So, it was quite the shift for us to move it to virtual because we had to. It actually worked surprisingly well, given the time that we had to put it together to do it that way. But, we moved the code school to entirely virtual. The event, it's an entire sort of spin, the Entrefest event I mentioned before, that's usually, 500 people all around our little neighborhood here in Cedar Rapids. It's held in different businesses all over the neighborhood. Like, it's intended to be experiential, had to move online. And so we found the team found some creative ways to send a little box of stuff to people that was kind of clever and funny and interesting local things to make it interesting, for example. And then we do little coding clubs for kids just to get them exposed to technology. And we're doing those online now, which we never did before. And all of these, it's a problem because it changes your plan. But it's also an opportunity. Our Entrefest event would only reach people who could come to Cedar Rapids, Iowa for 2 days. And we had attendees from all over the country come to it this time, which was, very different for us in terms of the reach that we could do and whatnot. The code school, similarly, it's let us expand across the state in a way that I don't think we would have been able to do if we wanted to do physical locations. So there's a lot of, learning that comes with some of the pain of adjusting to an unforeseen and unplanned pandemic. Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. That's a great example. And that's the type of information that I think a lot of nonprofits are looking for right now in the midst of crisis, in the midst of a pandemic. That is the crisis of today, but there'll be a crisis of tomorrow. So how can they be flexible and how can they adapt, on these initiatives that they have? And that's a perfect example of that. I love it. So you also mentioned in your article about the effects of being agile on financial growth. And so Diane and I did some digging. We looked into New BoCo. We looked at how your team went from 2 to 19, how you have tons of initiatives now that are available to the community. Can you tell us how Agile helps with that?
Yeah, I think the big thing is, and our strategy is unusual and maybe the opposite of what a prudent person would normally do, where you pick one thing and you do it really well. And working with startups all day, that's often advice that I give them. And yet, we're in a community where there's not that many people kind of in our space. It's a fairly small region, the couple 100,000 people. And, we knew we had core issues we were trying to solve in our community that have adjacent and very related problems. And if we didn't figure out how to solve them, we couldn't just wait for somebody to come up and figure them out. So, that idea in the beginning that we knew we would have that breadth, almost like a mile wide, inch deep, was kind of baked into every assumption that we made. And at the board, we talk about that risk, that's unusual and probably different because we have 2 and 3 people responsible for a single program in the organization. In a few cases, 1 person responsible, and it makes it really challenging. On the other hand, the ability to create teams with prioritization decisions that the product owners knew how to talk about to make good decisions of balancing team A's issues versus team B's priorities. We can't afford, just as an example, we can't afford to have a marketing person on every single team throughout the company. And so there's this model we've come up with where we essentially load balance and share that resource to the highest priority place that it can go. And the teams have the ability within some budgetary constraints to outsource things when we can't do it internally, for example. So that sort of ability for teams to adapt and find the best path, knowing that resources are limited, and the risks get higher when you change a lot. It worked really well to have the Scrum values in particular and Agile baked in from the beginning.
Wow, that's awesome.
Now, you mentioned your board just a moment ago, talking about how there could be risk in terms of your approach to how wide versus how deep. I'm thinking about my role as a board member over the years. I'm thinking about those that get recruited as board members. Have you recruited board members that had an understanding of Agile, or how have you helped board members understand what your approach was?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. our board is focused on the core governance functions, and on the day-to-day stuff, they're not involved. There's a lot of nonprofits where the boards get involved to help out on a lot of things. And our board certainly helps here and there, but its purpose is governance and helping us think through strategy as an organization. And so, I didn't put a constraint on board selection that requires them to have a deep understanding of Agile. However, they have to be able to tolerate the way we work. And I think a lot of board members would be uncomfortable with a model where there is no hierarchy baked into the system, and information is moving and we're tackling 12 problems at once. They would be very uncomfortable with that. And so our model has always been look for people who they may not have ever been trained on Agile, and I don't necessarily have to train them on Agile, but that they can handle the kind of work in the way that we get things done.
Yes, that makes sense. And so when you think then about, so if any staff member can come to any board meeting, and what your metrics or your scorecards might look like that you present to a board, I mean, you've seen tremendous growth in staff, in revenue, in programs, and outreach. So how is it that you translate your internal metrics that your teams are watching? How do you translate that to the board? Does it feel traditional board style, or is there something unique that you've come up with?
It's a great question. So, I mean, the one is we don't. There is no translation, right? Which I feel like is almost, an anti-pattern in a way, where we have one set of measures that the adorable employees get to see, but they're not privy to what we show the board, because that's not right. And so we have a dashboard that we use on publicly. Actually, it's public on the web. It's on outcomes.newbo.co. And it outlines the major goals that we have and progress toward those goals on a yearly basis. And our board meetings really talk about, are we accomplishing those goals? And then looking at just to make sure the organization is a good steward of resources, and tackling strategic questions. So there really isn't a translation that way. We've tried to make the goals that people, when you pull that card, not only do you see its impact on the budget, but hopefully you see its impact on the outcome that you're trying to drive. And that's normal and part of baked into everyday work, and not like a thing where you have to kind of bring it back together and sort of assemble a story around it. Hopefully it's baked in from the beginning.
That's fantastic. So I have one follow-up question about that, because my background is so heavily in philanthropy as a grant maker and then as a grant seeker, and building capacity in that way. And to think of the idea that salary is transparent across the nonprofit feels so foreign to so many nonprofits. I think that actually people might have more questions about that part of what you shared than even the Agile piece, but they go hand in hand. Could you just dig in on that a little bit? Have you found any resistance from either staff or from board? It's a very make work visible approach, and it's fantastic. But that one to me, I'm like, ooh, people are going to have questions, so I might as well ask.
Yeah, the salary stuff in particular, what we've attempted to do is to say, we've almost created a couple of algebra functions, in effect, that take into account, your years of professional work experience in this field, and a couple of other things, and attempt to just say, like, here's basically the arc of what your salary will be for a given position. And it's not even by position. There's really kind of three sort of groups that we put people in. And what it does is it prevents us from doing weird negotiations behind the scenes. It's sort of like buying a car when you go to the dealer and you're going in, you're going to be arguing with the sales guy who's going to go to his boss. We don't deal with that here either. It's straightforward. We have the ability to say, look, this is what we're paying for this position. We think it's in line with approximately what the market pays, and it just kind of is what it is. So if from a gender and racial discrimination perspective, it keeps everything very above board. It's not perfect, I'm sure, but the intent of it was to say there's no secrets here, and when somebody gets a raise or a promotion, it can't be because they're buddies with anybody else or whatnot. Some people's work is by nature much more visible and easier to celebrate than others. We didn't want that to be part of it, so it's a very simple model, and it works really well for what we do.
Wow, that's so groundbreaking. I think that's amazing.
I think the question might be, would you be willing to answer questions if people have any after hearing that about any of it, but in particular?
Sure. I mean, to the extent I have the answer. There's a lot of other people out there who've experimented in some really exciting ways. There's kind of a group of people all over the country that we talk to each other and we've learned from each other. There's a group up in Ann Arbor called Menlo Innovations. You're probably familiar with them, and Richard Sheridan's company. And they've done a great job with a very different approach to salary transparency and work transparency. And they're very public about it. They'll give tours of what they're doing. It's really incredible. So, and the other one I would hold out is the Scrum Alliance. You're probably familiar with those folks. Melissa and Howard have completely shifted that organization to embrace very similar approaches, and it's been really fun. They've come with a very different set of solutions. So you have to find what's right for you. And so I think people feel like, oh, there's like a template or a playbook that I can just follow, and it's like, no, this stuff comes from the core values of Agile that you will then create your answer from. And it might look the same as New BoCo, it might look the same as Geonetric, my former software company, it might look like Scrum Alliance, it might look like Menlo, but you can learn from other people to decide what's right for your business that matches your culture and your intent and your spirit.
Yes, that's amazing. Now, something I did notice on your website was that do you teach Agile, or are you reaching out to other businesses in Iowa or the community to spread more Agile?
Yeah, a little bit. We have people come by and, they ask the same questions you're asking here. And they're like, wow, how can I get more of this? And, so I don't know if I mentioned this, but I'm the board chairman for Scrum Alliance. And so, of course, we refer them over to, certified Scrum trainers to come in and do what they do. We have an Agile coach here locally who comes in and who works here with us all day. And we kind of do it in two pieces. One is we work with companies that are looking to adopt a more Agile mindset. So it's more of an informal coaching model. The other thing we do, though, is interestingly, in our same building, we have a school. There's like a experimental school project here called Iowa Big. And we've worked with them for the last few years to really infuse Agile into the way education with kids really owning their learning as opposed to being passive recipients of stuff coming at them. They're really participating in these projects that have real value in the community. It's a really incredible project. It's a whole interview of its own, but it's what schools should be. And, the ability to help them as they've figured out how to take the common values of Scrum, and they use some of the modern Agile stuff. They've baked it right into how they teach, and it's in the very first letter. My daughter's going to start there next year. She just got the letter, and I'm like, hey, those words are the same as in the modern Agile language. That's great. So yeah, it's amazing.
That's so exciting. I'm going to move my kids to Iowa. I love it.
But it's a pretty cool place.
Well, I'm so inspired and excited, and I know Jessica's like, well, let's go put the kids there, right? And also as a first LEGO League coach, right? I'm like hearing all these things, so I'm like, it's so exciting. But I guess we've covered a lot of ground. We've covered salary, metrics, how you've grown. Is there something we've missed in terms of what you think is the story of how you've grown, how you've done something really non-traditional and different that you would want others to understand if they're thinking about how they could learn from you and think about their own organization?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I thought about was it just happened in the meeting we just had. As you all know, right now the Black Lives Matters movement is happening, and it's everywhere. I marched with a group here last week, and we just had an all hands meeting, and one of the employees exhibited the Scrum value of courage and kind of said in front of the entire group, so our whole staff doesn't exactly. It's not particularly diverse, let's just say, and neither is our board. And what are we doing about it? And this idea that any employee can and would say that in front of the entire company, even though, of course, I knew that and we've talked about it quite a bit, but it's just that somebody would be willing and feel totally comfortable saying that. There's no repercussion. There's no like secret behind the scenes, like, why did you embarrass me kind of thing. It's like, that's expected. That's part of what we do. People ask tough questions. Sometimes it's the ones that are in your financials, but sometimes it's about the organization and its priorities. And, I think when employees feel comfortable calling out something that they see as maybe missing, I think that's a healthy part of the puzzle. And it's really valuable that we have it there.
Thank you so much for that. I do appreciate that.
I remember when we were first talking about starting the Startup Accelerator in, would have been 2012 and 2013, did research on different models for doing this. And, Some models were for-profit. There is like an investment arm of what we do that's a separate entity. That's very much a for-profit entity, where it's all one thing. And then there's another model where it's split. There's like a nonprofit that has a community mission that's about educating entrepreneurs, and there's an investment group that's maybe giving money to those entrepreneurs to help them grow. And we looked at different models. And I remember thinking, if I talk to some of the nonprofits around here, like they don't seem to change very much. And it's very not entrepreneurial. The cultures don't feel entrepreneurial. And I was like, there's got to be a way to do this. And, I think maybe this is what you're looking to do, but helping these companies to really find that entrepreneurial spirit and how Agile can help them respond to change more quickly and hear their customers and their constituents more quickly and respond to that change. I didn't want to be a sort of moribund nonprofit that just sort of ekes by. I mean, I wanted it to be something that's aggressive, that makes a real difference, that grows quickly. And, I think finding peers who maybe get that was really important to me. And I've been fortunate in our region. There's a number of nonprofit leaders who really get that sort of style and spirit, even if they may not think of it in the same words that we would use on this call. It's been heartening to me that the nonprofit sector, like every other, has people that are really pushing the boundaries and trying new things and experimenting and learning from those things.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. Yeah, I'd say that the Scrum values, you can find those in so many mission statements for nonprofits. Mm-hmm. Right? And so sometimes it's just about helping them understand, and showing those values is one of the ways that folks get hooked in. They're like, oh, that's all over our webpage and our annual report, and they just need to think about how they're going to harness it. So yeah, incredibly well-made point. Fantastic.
Yeah, completely agree. And the ability for, I think, those leaders to take that into the organizational design is maybe the sort of next step. Like those words are natural for a mission, and felt through volunteers or through the work that people do, but in the way they're organized, I feel like that's another level. People can use those values to really build something special as their culture, as their organizational design, and that's exciting to watch it happen.
I'm so excited to have nonprofits hear about your success and to see just a different way of whether they are starting a new nonprofit or they're existing and trying to think about shaking it up a little bit. I can't even wait. And I know that we're going to link the article with the video so that people can go back and read some of the history of what you've written before. Check out your website to see the progress. Jessica, any closing thoughts for us?
I think the one thing I would ask is what is one thing, if a nonprofit wants to move towards agility, what's one thing they can do today? Like what's something they can adopt or take on that would help them be more agile?
That's a pretty common question, because once leaders get a sense of what it really means to sort of adopt Agile through and through, it's often scary for them, and it feels like too much. The piece that I would start with would be creating a forum on a monthly basis, or maybe more frequent, that essentially is a retrospective that your team can have to just have a place and a normal place to talk. It's okay to say things that are not okay. And I feel like that starts a conversation, starts to build that trust. And the commitment isn't that hard to do, because it at least gets the ball rolling. But like beyond that, that's just the beginning of the rabbit hole that is Agile. But it gets them started. Yeah.
That's fantastic. So we'll see. We'll have to see if folks grab that idea of retrospectives and start on their Agile journey, right? It's just that, a journey.
That's exactly it. We're all learning from each other. Yep.
Yeah. Eric, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate having you with us and the articles, and we can't wait for folks to follow up with you.
Awesome. You're so welcome. Thank you for having me.